I've looked at controllers from EasySMX quite a few times, and I really do like them. I liked their budget offering, and I also really liked their other mobile controller. This is one that they just sent over though. It's the EasySMX M15. I gotta admit, it looks pretty interesting. This looks very similar to the one from Gamesir, but it's also way cheaper. I didn't buy the one from Gamesir just because it's too expensive. So let's hop in, take a closer look at this controller, and see if it's worth it. Let's hop over to their website and take a closer look at the controller itself. It only comes in one color right now, but I think the color looks pretty nice. This is not a Bluetooth controller, so you do have to connect it directly to your phone, but that should give you the best latency. This also uses full Hall effect joysticks and mechanical face buttons. You also get full console style grips, which look pretty nice, but we'll take a closer look at those later. There's micro switches underneath the face buttons. Now, I personally am not a fan of micro switches. I just don't like clicky, but hopefully these should be okay. These also have full Hall effect triggers, which are pretty nice. I find these a lot more responsive than your standard trigger. So all in all, it just looks like a pretty well-balanced controller if you want something for your phone. Now, the interesting thing is this should be also available on Amazon by the time this review is up. That's actually Canadian, so let me change that to US dollars. This is $60 US, and I think that's pretty good. You can also use the coupon code to get a little bit off that. Keep an eye on AliExpress too for those really good coin discounts. So unfortunately, it is trying to convert everything to Canadian because I'm in Canada, but I'll leave the conversion rate up on the screen. But this is the controller that it's competing with. The Gamesir G8 Galileo is pretty expensive though. I gotta admit, I have definitely wanted to try this controller, but I've been thrown off by the price many times. And this is the one reason why I cannot justify buying this G8 controller. Over $100 for a mobile controller is just too expensive. You can get this on Amazon though for 85 Canadian, and that's not bad, but it is also on sale. This is regularly $100, which is still really dang expensive. So I want to know if EasySMX can compete with Gamesir and their offerings. At 85 Canadian, this is only slightly cheaper, but you do want to keep an eye out for those sales and use coupon codes to bring this down quite a bit. So let's open this up, take a closer look at the controller, and see if it's worth buying. I'm curious to see how this one stacks up. On the box, we don't really have anything. It tells us a little bit more about the controller, but that's about it. It also shows the compatibility and what it comes with. So let's take a peek inside. In the box, we have a manual showing us how to use it, and that comes in a couple different languages. Let's set this aside in case we need it for later. And we also have the controller itself. Picking this up, it does feel pretty interesting. Design is pretty unique, and it's very comfortable to use. Looks like we have a clicky D-pad, and those clicky face buttons. I don't think these are going to bother me, but they are a little clicky. The bumpers have a nice hollow click to them. The menu buttons are also very clicky. And the triggers feel pretty good too. The build quality is pretty good. It's a nice solid plastic. Get some bumpers on the back too. And those have a nice hollow click to them. Well, not being my first choice, this white does look really clean. I don't know if this is going to stay like that forever though, but it does look pretty nice. It does feel a little bit lighter, but I don't think that's going to bother anybody. But yeah, all in all, this definitely feels like a nice controller. I really like these ergonomics on this thing. Just a quick layout of the controller itself. We have the D-pad down here. I think this is a pretty good position for it, and it's very comfortable to use with your thumb. Got the face buttons over here. These are also clicky. On the right side, we have the start button, and I believe this is a turbo button. There's a select button, and this is the function button to change some of the things about the controller. We also get a small LED notification light on the left side. On the bottom, we don't get anything, but we do get a USB-C port. On the back, we do get some programmable macro buttons. I've never really used these on any device or any controller, but it's nice to see that these are there if you want them. In terms of the size, this is pretty comparable to their old controller. It just basically feels like they sliced it in half and then extended it out. It improved on a lot of the flaws that this controller had, like a better D-pad. This one would completely bottom out. This one, however, has a nice pivot to it, and I think it should be really good for fighting games. If we compare this to their other controller, the M15, this is much bigger. So if you're looking for portability, I still think the M15 is the better option. This also has rubber membrane face buttons and a rubber membrane D-pad. I think this one would be better suited for retro gaming. If you want that authentic feel, the D-pad on this one does bottom out, so you are likely to get some false diagonals. I do prefer rubber membrane buttons all around, but many people like switches. The ones on this are not loud enough to bother me, so I think you'll really like it. But just comparing the size of these two, there's a pretty big difference, isn't there? In terms of weight, how heavy is this controller? If we put it on the scales, it comes out to 194.9 grams. Comparing that to their old M10 controller, this comes out to 138.1. So due to the size and the weight, I think this is a more portable controller overall, but at 195 grams, I don't think this is bad by any means. This is actually only ever so slightly lighter than their budget offering. The KK3 Max is just much heavier at 245.7 grams. The 8BitDo Ultimate Bluetooth is also much heavier at 244.7 grams. So overall, weight-wise, I think this is a great weight for a portable controller. So let's take a quick look at all the controls on this just to see how it stacks up. First of all, let's take a look at these joysticks. The joysticks on here are very similar to their other budget controller. The small ring around the joystick acts as a good anti-friction ring, and I don't think this is scraping the joystick stem at all. If you look really closely, you can also see some nice texture on the sides of the joysticks. I think this makes it very comfortable to use. They have L3 and R3 functionality, and they got a good click to them as well. They have a nice rubbery cap and a nice place for your finger to sit in. I actually really prefer these concave caps. I find them much more comfortable to use. But yeah, all in all, these are excellent joysticks. These have a good amount of height to them too. I like full-size joysticks, even on my handhelds, and I think these are really nice. Next up, let's take a closer look at these face buttons. They have a nice tactile micro switch click to them, but they're not too loud. This is very similar to what you'd find on a regular mouse. Kinda actually reminds me of a mouse click. There's not a lot of wiggle to them. They stick out far enough out of the controller itself to be comfortable, and there's a good amount of room between them. I also really like the font, and I think it looks really clean. All in all, excellent face buttons. These other buttons have a similar click to them, but this kind of feels more like the middle scroll button click on your mouse. It's more of a hollow click, as opposed to a high-pitched click. The D-pad has a nice hollow click to it as well. This kind of also reminds me of a standard mouse click. It's pretty nice. Actually, this is one of the best D-pads I've seen on a controller. I highly doubt you're going to get any false diagonals with using this. I actually kind of find it unique that these edges are rounded like this, and if we look very closely, there's actually a little bit of flare on the edges of this D-pad, and I think that's really nice. There are also smooth edges too, so it doesn't really cut into your finger. Taking a look at the triggers, they're pretty good. There's a nice amount of travel. The edge of the trigger is flared. They don't stick out past the bottom of the controller itself, so if you were to put this onto a table, it will actually sit on the controller lip, not the actual trigger. This is good for longevity of the trigger, especially if you put it down a lot. They are a gray plastic, but they do feel very high quality. These triggers also don't bottom out hard when I push it down. It's almost like they have a little cushion at the end. The bumpers have a nice hollow click to them. Again, this just kind of feels like a center scroll button click on a mouse, but ever so slightly quieter. You can push this from any angle and it'll make a nice click to it. It's not harder to push up here. This is going to sound more mushy as it's closer to the center, then sound more clicky as it moves outwards. I like triggers with a lot of travel distance though, but I think this is a good medium. All in all, excellent bumpers, excellent triggers. The back has those programmable macro buttons. Again, this just feels like your standard mouse click. It has a nice click to it, and you can push it from any side. It does get a little bit more hollow though as you push it near the bottom. These are also positioned nicely so they won't interrupt your gameplay. You can also see that texture on the back. It's a pretty cool little texture they put on here. On the inside where your phone sits, there's a nice rubber cover. I think this will fit nice with my two phones that I have, but we'll take a closer look at the fit later. On the other side, there's some more rubber, and the USB-C port has a good amount of flex to it. Very nice. All I had to do to get my phone in was rest one side over here, then stretch it out and put the USB port side in last. is not sitting on the rubber on the actual side that has the USB-C port. I think this is not really ideal because it's putting all that pressure on the USB slot. I don't think this is going to be bad overall, just something to note. This might also allow you to use a case on this, but I'll take a look at that in a second. I did try that case on there, but unfortunately that USB-C isn't deep enough to actually sit into the case itself. My pinky keeps clipping into this USB-C port. I don't really like the position of this. I think they should have just put it somewhere else, maybe on the bottom center. On the old M10, it was slightly recessed, so your finger didn't really go into that. This just made it so your fingers never actually got anywhere close to the USB-C port. I liked having it recessed like that, and it was just perfectly positioned so it never actually touched your finger. I've also noticed something slightly concerning. This right side where the USB-C port sits kind of rocks back and forth. That's because this rubber isn't holding the phone in place. However, this could just be my phone. This definitely has a little wobble to it. You probably won't notice this when you're playing, especially if you're holding the device firmly in your hands, but that is something to take note of. Titan Quest works instantly on this controller. I'm actually not noticing any input latency either with moving. It seems very smooth. Titan Quest is one of the best Android ports that I've ever seen, so I was pretty optimistic that this was going to work with this controller. And yeah, it just works. I don't know, this is pretty nice. I do still feel that wobble though. That is slightly concerning. Again, this is just probably with my phone, but I'm curious to see what you think if you grab this controller. Are you having these wobble issues with your phone, or is it just mine? Another game that works really well is Wreckfest. If I press that trigger down ever so slightly, it is going to build up completely all the way to being maxed out. So racing games on this are going to run absolutely awesome. And I'm not really noticing that wobble when I'm playing this. It's only really when you're moving it around. If you're looking for a really good racing game on Android, I highly recommend checking out Wreckfest. I like how smooth these triggers are as you're pushing them down and building up that pressure. So all in all, do I recommend this controller? Well, I think the ergonomics are really good, and it feels like a full-size controller. There are only two things that I don't like about this controller. I think the build quality, the ergonomics, the face buttons, joysticks, triggers, everything about the controls I think is really spot on. However, the one big issue that I'm having with this is just probably my phone. As mentioned, there's just a little bit of wobble and I don't really like that. If you pick this up, let me know if it works on your phone a little bit better than it does on mine. I've never had this on the other controller that I tried from them, so it's interesting to see it on this one. They could have just made these pads ever so slightly bigger, and I think we would have been okay. The other small thing is only really going to bother me, but when I hold my pinkies at the bottom of the grip, it does kind of fit into that USB-C port. I don't personally like that, but I think this is not going to bother everybody, just depends on how you hold the controller. Yeah, I can just feel that thing wobbling. Even when I'm going like that, I can feel the whole controller kind of wobble back and forth. Try sliding this around to get it positioned a little better. No, it doesn't matter how I position this, it still wobbles. I don't know, I think it's a good controller, but I think it's going to largely come down to your phone. At least with my Poco F3, I don't find this ideal. Have you ever had that wiggle on other phone controllers that you've used before? Let me know in the comments below. I also don't think that this would fit a tablet, just because this is the max it's going to stretch out. So what do you guys think about the EasySMX M15? I kind of wonder if that wobble would be persistent on the Gamesir, but as I don't have the Gamesir, I can't really compare the wobble on that to this. Maybe that's normal, but for me, I just kind of noticed that. So I think this is a good controller, but just with those two little faults. If you have any questions regarding the controller, make sure to ask in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future videos, and as always, thanks for watching.